I had just completed my final exam of the year. All my responsibilities were behind me, except one. I'd been persistently trying, and failing, to secure a summer job. This thought crossed my mind again as I walked home, souring my mood. As I stepped off campus grounds and headed toward my house, my gaze drifted to Greenwood Cemetery across Elm Street. It always seemed oddly placed, wedged between apartment complexes and college dormitories. But it wasn't just its location that felt strange. For imposing stone gargoyles perched at each corner, their watchful eyes fixed inward. The fence enclosing this square patch of land stood about 8 or 9 feet tall, and it was no mere decoration. Whoever erected it intended it to do more than just mark the cemetery's boundaries. This fence was built to keep people out. It was on this towering barrier that I noticed a freshly posted sign. Even from across the street, the large "Help Wanted" message was impossible to miss. I had never seen a job posting on this fence before, which only piqued my curiosity. I crossed Elm Street to take a closer look. Stepping up to the sign, I read the smaller print below, "See security booth inside for details." Peering through the iron bars, I spotted the silhouette of a man seated inside a small wooden booth. Without hesitation, I stepped inside. The man behind the booth window must have noticed me approaching because he stood up and walked out to meet me, wearing a warm and friendly expression. Despite his white hair indicating age, his movements were quick and full of energy. Dressed in a stylish black suit, he greeted me. "How may I help you today?" he asked in a deep, relaxed voice. "I just noticed the sign on the fence. Is that for some kind of job or something?" I asked, unsure. He nodded with a slight smile. "Of sorts," he replied. I remained silent, waiting for further explanation. "Why don't we take a walk?" he suggested with a small nod and a smirk, leading me down the cemetery path. I followed as we strolled past rows of headstones. "I won't waste your time, so I'll get straight to it. This cemetery has been here for a very long time, longer than you might guess. Many caretakers have watched over it. I've held this role for over 40 years, and I don't intend to give it up anytime soon. However, due to some unexpected circumstances, I need to step away for a few days to take care of other matters. Those I would normally rely on are unavailable. The job I'm offering is straightforward. Watch over this place for a single night, just one night. A night that happens to be exactly 1 week from today." I barely registered the first part of what he said, my focus locked onto the fact that the job was only for a single night. "I'm sorry, sir, but I'm looking for something more stable." "A single night's work just isn't enough," he cut me off mid-sentence. "I'm offering $2,000 cash up front, completely off the books." My mouth hung open for a moment, disbelief and skepticism washing over me. I don't think I can do that. No job at the university operates that way." "It's against policy," he interrupted again. "This cemetery isn't owned by the university. If it were, they would have bulldozed it long ago. They have no say in the matter, and thank God for that." I remained silent, unsure of what I had stumbled into or what was really happening. Sensing my hesitation, his expression softened. "My name is Mark." "I suppose I should have started with that," he said. I introduced myself and shook his hand, though reluctantly. Mark stopped walking, turned to me, and studied me for a moment before reaching into his suit pocket. As I mentioned, I'd rather not waste any more time. He pulled out a set of keys and extended his hand toward me. "The choice is yours, but I need an answer now." Slowly, I reached out and took the keys, not giving much thought to the decision. "Good. Be back here in 1 week at 7 p.m. These keys will get you into my booth. I'll leave you a letter, read it before you begin. It contains everything you need to know. Your payment will be in the drawer next to the chair inside the booth." Without another word, Mark turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the middle of the cemetery, staring down at the keys in my hand. I slipped them into my pocket and headed home, mulling over the possibilities. Worst case scenario? I show up in a week, there's no money, and I head home empty-handed. Best case? I walk away with $2,000 for one night's work. What did I have to lose? The following days were filled with celebrations, some drinking, and a lot of sleeping, interspersed with a few unsuccessful job searches. But I wanted to enjoy at least part of my summer before returning to the daily grind. On the day of my shift, I woke up around 3 p.m. with a splitting headache from the previous night's festivities. I considered staying in, hanging out with my roommates for another night of drinking, instead of trekking down to the cemetery for what might turn out to be a scam. But for some reason, seeing the keys sitting on my empty desk pushed me to get out of bed. I figured the half-mile walk to the cemetery and back was worth it if it meant making the easiest $2,000 of my life. With nothing better to do, I decided to leave early and arrived at the cemetery around 6:30 p.m. I loitered for a few minutes before stepping through the gates. I wanted to scout the area for anything unusual. Given the circumstances, who wouldn't? I saw no sign of Mark or anyone else who might cause concern, so I decided to take the plunge. With purpose, I strode toward the small booth, pulled out the set of keys, and, much to my surprise, the first one I tried fit perfectly into the lock. I had almost expected none of the keys to work. I pulled the door open, revealing a modest but inviting interior. The space was small and square, with a single chair positioned in front of a counter and window. A tall wooden cabinet with 2 locked doors stood to one side. After briefly scanning the room, my eyes settled on a small drawer beneath the counter. My pulse quickened as I stepped inside and shut the door behind me. I sifted through the keyring, testing each key on the drawer until one finally clicked into place. With a deep breath, I turned the lock and pulled it open to reveal a thick envelope. My hands trembled as I hastily opened it and counted each crisp $100 bill. $2,000. I counted again, then once more. I examined each bill for signs of forgery, but they appeared genuine. In my fixation on the money, I hadn't even noticed the letter that had slipped out of the envelope and onto the floor. After stuffing the cash into my backpack, I picked up the letter and began to read. To whom it may concern, although this job might seem like an easy way to make some quick cash, the responsibility is far greater than you can imagine. Below, I have provided a list of rules. Each must be followed with the utmost care and attention. There are few burial sites in the world as unique as this one. The most important thing to remember is this: no one good has ever been buried here. Rule number 1, the gate. This cemetery has a single gate, the only entrance and exit. The gate must be locked by 8 p.m. and remain shut until sunrise. You can close it earlier if you prefer. Absolutely no one, including law enforcement or emergency personnel, is allowed in during this time. As the temporary caretaker, you must stay within the cemetery grounds until dawn. The largest key on your ring is for the gate. Rule number 2, the ghost hunters. Due to the cemetery's location in an urban area with a youthful population, it often attracts so-called ghost hunters and paranormal investigators. While the gate should remain locked for most of your shift, if you catch anyone trying to enter or sneaking inside, you must remove them immediately. You are authorized to call law enforcement to have trespassers removed, but they are not permitted inside the cemetery after 8 p.m. Get them out quickly. Who knows what they might discover? Rule number 3, the suit. One of the keys on your ring unlocks the wooden closet beside you. Inside, you'll find various items, including a suit similar to mine and a matching pair of shoes. You must change out of your clothes and into this suit for the duration of your shift. I have estimated your size as accurately as possible. It may not fit perfectly, but it will do. They need to believe you are me. You may keep the suit after your shift. Rule number 4, the salt. I have placed white roses on 4 graves throughout the cemetery. Find them. In the closet next to the suit, you will find containers of salt. Once the gate is locked, proceed to these graves and create a circle of salt around each headstone. The circle doesn't need to be perfect, but it must be unbroken with no gaps. Once completed, stay as far away from these graves as possible and never disturb the salt barrier. Carry an extra container of salt with you at all times. Rule number 5, the bells. Some graves have bells attached to strings leading underground. This practice, dating back hundreds of years, was originally a safeguard for those who were mistakenly buried alive. If the body moved, the bell would ring, alerting a watchman to dig them up. These bells now serve a different purpose. If you hear one ringing, immediately surround the grave with salt. Then, stay away. There's another scenario you might encounter. If multiple bells start ringing in quick succession, stop where you are and form a salt circle around yourself as fast as possible. Make sure to leave ample space, as you won't be able to step outside it for a while. Stay still and don't fall for any tricks that might tempt you to break the circle. Rule number 6, the gargoyles. Each corner of the cemetery is guarded by a stone gargoyle. All 4 have identical designs, small bodies with bat-like wings and sinister faces. They perch atop stone pillars at the fence corners, gazing inward toward the cemetery's center. If you notice one missing, ignore it. If you see one in a different position, look away or close your eyes. Do not acknowledge its movement. They won't pose a threat if you leave them alone. Rule number 7, Hank. Near the southwest corner of the cemetery is a weathered headstone marking the grave of an unknown individual. The only visible part of the name reads Hank. No dates or additional information remain. What you must know about Hank is this: if he rises from his grave during your shift, keep your distance and do not return to the security booth. Inside the front pocket of your suit jacket is a small box of matches. Light one and toss it onto Hank's grave. Once done, ignore him if you see him. After that, you may safely return to the booth. When your shift is complete, unlock the gate and leave the keys in the drawer. Best of luck. Mark. I chuckled as I read the letter, amused by the effort Mark had put into crafting it. Despite the humor, I resolved to follow each rule to the letter. Even if this turned out to be some elaborate joke, $2,000 was worth it. I opened the wooden closet and, sure enough, there was the suit Mark had described. It looked sophisticated and incredibly expensive. Without wasting any time, I changed out of my clothes and into the suit. It fit perfectly, as if it had been tailored just for me. I didn't know much about suits, but even I could tell this one was top tier, far beyond what I could afford. I glanced at the list again before folding the letter and tucking it into my pocket. Rule number 1, the gate. I figured this would be the easiest thing to check off the list. I grabbed my keys and made my way toward the gate. As I approached, I took a quick glance around to make sure no one was watching. As expected, the cemetery was empty. I tried to pull one side of the gate shut with one hand, but it resisted more than I anticipated. The heavy metal gate required a lot of effort to close. Once both sides were secured, I selected the largest key and inserted it into the lock. A satisfying click echoed as the mechanism engaged. With the gate secured, I pulled out the letter again. I assumed handling the ghost hunters wouldn't be too much trouble. They were probably a common nuisance for Mark, especially at night. Since I hadn't thoroughly explored the cemetery yet, I decided to take a walk and check for anyone who might still be inside. As I wandered through the area, a strange thought crept into my mind. In all the times I had passed by this place, I had never once seen a visitor. You'd think someone would come to pay respects to a loved one, but not here. Mark's words from the letter echoed in my head. No one good has ever been buried here. The phrase sent a shiver down my spine. What did he mean by that? After searching the cemetery and finding no trespassers, I returned to the security booth, planning to kill time on my phone or read the book I brought. On my way back, I noticed something unusual. A white rose lay beside a headstone. I casually went back to the booth, grabbed a salt canister, and returned to the grave, pouring a circle around it. As I carefully created the barrier, I wondered if the salt would damage the grass. I wasn't an expert, but I was pretty sure salt wasn't great for lawns. Yet, the cemetery's grass looked flawless. Why had Mark instructed me to do this? I pushed the question aside. I was here to make money, not question instructions. Once I finished the first circle, I moved on to locate and salt the remaining 3 graves, ensuring the circles had no gaps. Once done, I returned to the booth. Reviewing the letter again, I confirmed I had followed all the instructions. The gate was locked, the graves were secured, and the grounds were clear of intruders. The following hours passed uneventfully. I browsed my phone, texted a few friends, and read a couple of chapters from my book. I decided against listening to music, not because I feared a corpse might ring a bell, but because sitting alone in a dark cemetery inside a well-lit booth felt unsettling. Eventually, I grew restless and stepped outside for some fresh air. A cool night breeze drifted through the cemetery, and the only sound was the gentle chirping of crickets. I leaned back against the wall, taking a sip from my energy drink when a sharp, piercing belch shattered the silence, scaring me half to death. I dropped the can, spilling its contents onto the pavement. The noise had come from somewhere nearby, but the darkness hid the source. Grabbing my flashlight, I ventured toward the sound. The beam of light landed on a headstone, where a bell swayed back and forth, ringing loudly. I froze in confusion, staring at it for a moment before snapping out of my daze. I told myself this had to be one of Mark's pranks to spook me. But as the ringing persisted, a chill crawled over my skin. Goosebumps rose on my arms, and paranoia set in. I hurried back to the booth, grabbed another canister of salt, and rushed back to encircle the grave. The moment the salt barrier was complete, the bell fell silent. Breathing heavily, I reassessed the situation and convinced myself it wasn't too bad. Still feeling somewhat in control, I turned away from the grave and took just a few steps before the bell started ringing again. I watched in terror as another bell joined in, then another from farther down the path. Panic gripped me as more bells chimed in from all directions. Within seconds, 5, 6, then 7 bells rang in eerie synchronization, their deafening sound filling the cemetery. Mark's letter didn't explicitly say what the bells meant, but I instinctively knew they weren't the real threat, they were a warning. With shaking hands, I grabbed another canister of salt and quickly poured a circle around myself, aiming for an 8 or 9 foot radius. Just before finishing, I ran out of salt. Desperately, I spread what I had left to close the gap, working frantically against the rising fear. 30 seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity, but I finally sealed the circle. Collapsing onto the ground, I struggled to steady my breathing. Then, without warning, every single bell stopped ringing. The cemetery plunged into an unsettling silence. Even the chirping crickets had vanished. I held my breath, scanning my surroundings with wide eyes, searching for anything out of place. A deep sense of dread settled over me as my gaze landed on the corner fence post ahead. My heart skipped a beat when I realized the gargoyle statue that once perched there was missing. I looked to the other corners, each one was empty. Before I could fully process it, the sound of scraping filled the air. I aimed my flashlight toward the far end of the trail. Behind a tree, I noticed the grass shifting, with dirt being tossed aside. Initially, I assumed it was just a gopher burrowing its way into the cemetery. That assumption quickly shattered when a sizable form slowly emerged from the soil behind the tree. From my vantage point, the only visible detail was the earth crumbling and cascading off its surface. I dared not step beyond the circle. Silence lingered for what felt like an eternity, until a sharp clicking noise echoed from behind the tree. A figure stepped forward, a decayed corpse, stripped to the bone, staggering toward me in a jerky, mechanical manner. When I say staggering, you might picture a frail, elderly man shuffling slowly. But no, this abomination stormed down the main cemetery path at an unnerving speed. As it neared, my flashlight revealed its grotesque details. Charred remnants of flesh clung loosely to ashen bones, while sinewy tendons dangled and writhed with every movement. Protruding from its exposed ribcage were withered organs that swayed with its stride. The skull was missing a jagged portion on the right side, and an ominous horn jutted from the left, as though it belonged there all along. Its jaw appeared intact, but a dark, viscous fluid seeped from between its teeth, dripping steadily to the ground. Panic surged through me as I frantically searched for an escape or a weapon. My feet shifted restlessly, but I forced myself to stay inside the protective circle of salt. The creature halted at the edge of the circle, just a few feet away. My balance wavered, and I almost stumbled out of the boundary, my flashlight slipping from trembling hands. Silence reigned once again. The jagged bones of the creature's feet rested just on the circle's edge. Doubt gnawed at me. Could a simple line of salt truly hold this nightmare at bay? My odds of survival seemed slim. Just then, a powerful gust of wind descended from above, followed by a thunderous crash. Stone wings extended from one of the previously dormant gargoyle statues. The fallen flashlight illuminated the surrounding area, revealing 3 additional gargoyles encircling the monstrous corpse now crumpled on the ground. Recalling Mark's instructions, I quickly retrieved his letter and skimmed to the 6th rule: turn away and close your eyes. That was all I needed to do. And so, I obeyed. Horrific sounds filled the air, bones splintering, stone striking flesh, and viscous splashes onto the grass. My body tensed at the vibrations beneath me. Only when the cacophony ceased did I dare to look back. One gargoyle stood motionless, clutching a heap of bones with the detached, grotesque skull perched neatly on top. The remaining 3 gargoyles had returned to their original positions at the cemetery's corners. Cautiously, I retrieved my flashlight and, after a moment's hesitation, stepped beyond the salt barrier. The sequence of events had rattled me, yet I believed the gargoyles meant no harm, provided I respected their domain. Releasing a shaky breath, I made my way back toward the booth. Just as I began to relax, a chill crawled up my spine. Instinctively, I knew I was being watched. Dread pooled in my stomach as sinister laughter punctuated the silence. "You shouldn't have left your little circle," a voice taunted between unsettling giggles. Slowly, I turned, shining my light on a towering figure lurking in the darkest part of the cemetery. His frail shoulders rose and fell with his laughter, head jerking unnaturally. Despite appearing alive, he looked more diseased than any living being should. His thin frame was twisted and unnatural, clad in tattered clothing reminiscent of an old farmer. His hands and nails were filthy, his sunken eyes tinged with a sickly green hue bulging from his pallid face. "You'd better ruin," he teased, voice dripping with malice. 10. I hesitated, confused. 9. Realization struck like a bolt of lightning. He was counting down. 8. My heart pounded as I recalled Mark's mention of Hank's grave. This must be him. I bolted toward the southwest corner. 7. I pushed myself harder than ever before. 6. His countdown grew louder. My eyes locked onto an old, worn headstone that matched the description. Just as I neared it, I tripped over another grave marker, crashing to the ground. 5. Dazed, I glanced at the stone in front of me. Hank. No other words. This was it. 4. Scrambling, I dug into my coat pocket for matches. 3. I fumbled, spilling most of them onto the damp grass. 2. Grasping one, I hastily struck it against the box. 1. The match refused to ignite. "Here I come." Panic overtook me as Hank sprinted toward me at an impossible speed. A heavy impact landed beside me, forcing me to roll away. In front of me stood the gargoyles, their stone forms now blocking Hank's path. 2 gargoyles pinned him down as he reached for me, buying precious seconds. I struck the match once more. "No," Hank whimpered. "No, no, no. Stop." His pleas dissolved into anguished screams. With determination, I dropped the lit match onto the grave. Green flames erupted, enveloping the site. Hank fell silent. When I looked up, the gargoyles had vanished. All that remained was Hank's motionless form, his head hanging in despair. Shakily, I stood and walked toward the gate. As I reached the entrance, curiosity made me glance back. Hank was gone. I collected my belongings and sat against the fence, waiting for dawn. When sunlight finally crept over the horizon, I unlocked the gate, returned the keys, and walked home, never looking back again. I didn't sleep when I arrived. No matter how hard I tried, sleep eluded me for days. Eventually, things improved. Even now, I occasionally catch sight of Mark lingering at the cemetery gates when I pass by. He always smiles, a look of recognition in his eyes. I haven't spoken to him since that fateful day, and honestly, I wouldn't know what to say if I did. I've kept the entire ordeal to myself, never mentioning it to my roommates or friends. I wouldn't even know how to begin explaining it. Who in their right mind would believe me? Yet, in the stillness of my bedroom at night, the unsettling sound of clicking bones sometimes jolts me awake. And on the brink of sleep, a whisper interrupts my drifting thoughts. 10, 9, 8, 7,